Hi, everyone. Jonathan Brandt, Go Out Living. We are honored today to have a special guest. Dr. Ahmed is joining us. He is a cardiologist, and he's also the owner of Lila Health, which is a gut health solution, which is a prebiotic, a probiotic, and a postbiotic, which is all combined, which totally amazing. With my history of getting a significant part of my colon taken out, it resonates with me hugely. That was this summer's. But today we're going to talk about a little bit more of tragedy. My tragedy, doctor's tragedy. Everybody knows that I lost my wife coming up on a month now. We had the funeral a little over a week ago. And yeah, it's very fresh, to say the least. Um, and we were talking earlier, just before we came on, between the insurance part of it, never ending, to uh, just support in general can be very difficult, whether it's from the doctors, the hospital. It it could be family, to be honest with you, which I've struggled with. Uh, Everybody sees it differently, and they react differently uh, to loss, basically. So, with that, yeah, I'd love to hear Dr. Ahmad. Please let us know. Well, I'm sorry, but let us know what tragedy you've been through lately with family.
Yes, you're as we were talking about before we started this kind of officially. Your story resonated with me in a not only a professional way but a deeply personal way. Uh, for all the reasons that you mentioned very aptly and very succinctly. Uh, to kind of cut right into the story, my wife's three cousins who are like siblings to her. And they lived under one roof for many years. They aren't the most well off family, but these are without sacrificing their privacy. They're three kids essentially in their early 20s. Uh, Last April, their father, who's the breadwinner, they're immigrants from Canada. And that adds a wrinkle to it when it comes to insurance that we can talk about. But he, unbeknownst to anyone else, he kind of had his health issues throughout his life and didn't want to burden anyone with a new health issue. But he sought care for kind of intractable stomach pain. Turned out that he had end stage pancreatic cancer. He made it 4 weeks. And I'll touch a little bit about kind of all the complexities, family, provider, the whole ecosystem, rather, kind of failing him. Uh, Later in our conversation, but the tragedy gets worse. Their mother, was a homemaker, which is an extremely important job, but it's not one that puts food on the table, right? And so these three kids are dealing with immediate and unexpected loss and grief, are working, you know, taking turns flying back from Canada to the States to go back to their job so they can have enough money to eat. And then late last year, she gets diagnosed with advanced gastric cancer and passes
Wow.
legitimately a month and a week after her diagnosis. They thankfully are now living, 15 minutes down the road from us, as opposed to a coast away. Uh, but they're in no position to hold down a job, understandably so. They're in no position to even process the first tragedy, let alone the second tragedy.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
it's just a horrible experience.
Yeah, and you can't, even words don't describe it, to be honest with you. Unless you go through it, people don't understand. Um, it's not just the hurt that they're gone, but everything in between. It doesn't end. I'm not very far into it, but the emotional side, the mental side continues, and there's to me, there's not a lot of support behind that. And a lot of that starts with just us even having this conversation, saying there's others out there like us, um, that we just want to get out that, we are here as a support system. And we want to get the truth out, to be honest. Um, Now, with you talking about, here's my thing, and I don't know where to go from it, but we talk about why, or we think about why we're getting cancer, why obesity, why, from a doctor's standpoint, and I know you're not your cardiology, but where is the disconnect? How did we get here? Because I was talking to somebody yesterday about my stuff, and she's like, "Well, it goes back at least 20 years." And to me, it actually goes back 50 years, you know, from a
I'm inclined
change in
to agree.
our diet, basically, is how I look at it. But maybe you could give us a little bit on what you think.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I would say 50 years plus. If I had to put a timestamp on it, on when kind of the snowball was small, but it had started to become a bigger one. It's really the Industrial Revolution. Like you look at the meatpacking industry. Many of the followers may have read The Jungle in high school, or are aware of kind of the conditions that factories had, and uh, maybe don't put the dots together, but have this innate sense that what we eat is clearly not good for us. And I hesitate to call it the Western diet because now it's a global diet, but it started as the Western kind of industrial late stage capitalism type of diet. Let's cut corners with minimal regulation, which continues to be a bigger and bigger issue. Without getting political about it, it's just kind of the truth, regardless of which side you're on. Uh, but it's cheaper and it's faster to eat unhealthy than it is to eat healthy. And then you compound that with, if you're in an urban setting with a city close by, then maybe it's a little bit easier. But if you're in a rural setting, it's actually harder. I did some work in medical school. I went to medical school in Alabama, and I got a scholarship through the rural health program. And part of that was going into rural areas, like towns of 3,000 people. And you do research as part of medical school, and one of my research projects was going to Black communities in rural Mississippi and Alabama, and evaluating what they could eat on an affordable basis that would be healthy. And even though many of these people were farmers, they they weren't eating their own crops. Like, that's to sell, that's to make money so that you can eat. There weren't healthy options. From salt intake, one of the things I tell friends and family and patients. I'll give you a quick story. A really close friend of mine a few months ago texted me and was like, "My blood pressure is 145 over something, 90 something. Normal is 130 over 80 or less, but that requires medication." And he was like, "I don't want to go on medication." So I said, "Go to your pantry." I used two examples. Soy sauce, if you eat soy sauce, one serving, which I don't adhere to, and I think most people don't when they eat sushi, is a tablespoon of soy sauce is 20% of your day's sodium. If you eat two hamburger buns with nothing in between, that's 20% of your day's sodium. I mean, we're talking about high blood pressure, but it all goes into the cellular damage, the DNA damage that takes place. You've got microplastics in the environment. You've got food deserts. you know, GMO, I don't disagree with the term, because Mendel, from Mendelian randomization, like that's GMO in a way as well. You're selecting for a bigger, nicer looking crop, but we've gotten a whole different extreme of genetic modification, and we don't know the downstream effects. We're guinea pigs.
Right. Well, and okay, and the reason I was bringing that up, um, you mentioned, I mean, both of your family members passed fairly quickly. So one misdiagnosis maybe, or just simply not paying attention to your own body. I can speak on that, for for me personally, I just ignored everything. My wife though didn't, but she got misdiagnosed for almost 10 years, they said. So in the end, it took 15 years to take her, but she was very vocal with her health and didn't get anything out of it. We were too late. I mean, she was one step away from stage 4 5 years ago. So I guess that's my question. How do we know, as we talked about, the food, all that probably is helping cause some of it, if not all of it. Um, but how do we get the health industry to be more proactive with diagnosing these things? For one, she had lost an eye to cancer, and they never thought about testing her for cancer. you know, so
What type of malignancy did she have, if you don't mind me asking?
she had cervical cancer, and I'm not sure on her. Uh, the other one, she was 10 years old, so I don't know for sure.
Sure. Um, yeah, that's a really great and very difficult to answer question. There are multiple buckets that I put this into. One is, you know, physicians used to be called house officers, and that term is still used in training, but they were called house officers because they were in house. They were on call all the time. I understand that's, having lived through it and doing it currently, it's not a great way to be able to have a family and a life outside the hospital. But I think the profession has swung too far in the other direction, where it's a 9 to 5 for most physicians. That's not to say that I'm holier than thou or anything like that. There are great providers out there, uh, but taking that extra step, talking about insurance, for example, to keep the lights on, I have 5 minute to 15-minute visits with patients. And I am chronically late, but my patients come to me because they know I'm probably spending valuable time with a patient before them that I will then pay forward to them. It impacts family life because I'm late, and my daughter and my wife are like, "Why are you late?" And I'm like, "Well, you know why."
Right.
But something that we ran into with both was, both the malignancies, was providers did not pay attention, did not give the support. In the first instance, very similar to your story, it was a misdiagnosis. Uh, he had gotten a CT scan with a mass on the pancreas roughly 5 months prior to his diagnosis. Would it have made a difference if they had biopsied it, even though the radiology report said suspicious for malignancy? The GI doctor did nothing about it. I don't know. Pancreatic cancer is notoriously aggressive and hard to cure, but he could have gotten potentially something called a Whipple procedure, where they take the pancreas out if it was localized to the pancreas. It was too late by the time he got the diagnosis. And even then, I tend to see red in these situations and act a little impulsively. So I did exactly that because it was someone that I cared about and who was really suffering and not getting the attention they needed. And so I reached out to the hospital's legal department and was like, "Hey, there's a lawsuit on your hands if you don't do things right." People coming around at 5:30 a.m. when he's not awake, not being able to get his pain scale and address it appropriately, like simple things like that. At the end of someone's life, they should have grace, and they should have a symptom free, as much as possible, kind of quality of life to be able to say goodbyes and wrap things up in a nice bow. He didn't get that, and it became very litigation averse after I spoke to them with that kind of language. It was very much like, we don't want to touch the patient because we might get sued, as opposed to, "Hey, do the right thing and you won't get sued. That's all we're asking for." Uh, Obviously, it was a bluff, but to kind of, it's a long way to say, what we were able to identify as likely the, at least one major factor was that they lived in, uh, you know, the Corn Belt, and the pesticides that are used, the way I learned this after the fact because I did research on this, uh, the way that they're graded by the FDA, any of these pesticides are known to be carcinogenic, and they literally had a cornfield in their backyard. And so I find it very hard to believe that that didn't play a large role. And I think that's kind of on the people who govern. It's you know
Well, you put it exactly. I'm from Nebraska. Well, I'm from South Dakota, but we were living in Nebraska when this all happened. In South Dakota, I mean, yeah, we're right there in the Corn Belt. There's a huge uptick in cancer just in our little area. We were a town of, you know, 9,000 people, I believe. But there are people coming from all over because that's the other thing. Where do you go? you know, there's smaller hospitals, there's less. I mean, the oncologist and a lot of the actual team is flowing in from Colorado because they can't find anybody. So that's another part of it is you mentioned, 5 to 10 minute visits. One, you don't have time, but there's just not enough people to do it. And that again goes back to, okay, we didn't plan very well. We've been doing this for the last, how, like you brought up, even more than 50 years, and we didn't see it coming, or we ignored it, you know? So things are getting lost or missed along the way. So my next question is, okay, you get missed. And something I kind of had a hard time with was understanding it now. Okay, we get diagnosed, but it can take anywhere from, mine moved pretty quickly, but Christie's, it took months to even get to the starting stages of chemo and radiation. So, because to me, there's such a disconnect between everybody involved. You got to schedule this and schedule that. And, for us, we had to go to Colorado on top of it, so you're driving 3 hours or what have you. How do we, again, for the patient, how are we going to make that transition or that um, those pieces fall in together more smoothly, I guess?
yeah, again, great question with a not a great solution. It's a systems level problem. Medicine has become so siloed. Before it was, Sherlock Holmes, for example, was based on your primary care doctor, or at that time, what a general practitioner was, and it was because doctors at that point were known for their astute power of observation and their ability to navigate kind of all organ systems. Granted, there was a lot less knowledge to know back then, and so specialization is necessary. Not everybody can do surgery, so on and so forth. But uh, to give you an example from these kids' father and his care, he was on a surgical service because he had obstruction of the bile duct, and they put in a cholecystostomy tube. He should have been on a medicine service where they knew how to navigate these things and knew the right resources. We got him to that service, but at that point, the relationship was so frayed that they were basically taking a hands-off approach. But the way is better communication and understanding as a basic educational foundation, regardless of what specialty you're in. Just because you're a surgeon and you cut, I'm a proceduralist, but having that empathy and knowing that, hey, there's a specialty called palliative care that deals with tough conversations if you can't do it yourself or are not trained or don't trust yourself, and they can alleviate a lot of the symptoms that come with it. Things like feeling nauseous all the time, in pain all the time, and trying to wing it yourself, or the worse option, which is what they took, not addressing it at all because they're afraid of how do you dose a fentanyl patch in an
Right.
end stage cancer patient and not uh, quicken their demise. uh, that disconnect is present at a systems level, and there's no incentivization uh, to make it more connected.
Well, I was also a certified nurse assistant in the hospital. I was a surgical technologist.
Okay,
And
yes, you see.
well, yeah. And you brought up the empathy part of it. There's that part of you in that setting that kind of has to hold off on some of that. You can't let your feelings and emotions get involved with every single patient. However, we we've gone too far. We had a hard time. We found some great doctors, don't get me wrong, but there were some in there that just, wow. I mean, they did not listen. It was, you walked in and it was a 10-minute conversation of, what did they got nothing out of that. We'll see you next time kind of thing. especially with Christie's aspect. But that also brings up my other thing that I saw with like nurses. They're more their job is not about the patient anymore, it's about making sure the paperwork's all done. And that was me as a medical helicopter pilot. If you didn't have your T's crossed and I's dotted, man, corporate was going to be all over your butt because that's how they deal with insurance companies. So again, we've gone away from the actual patient care to all the paperwork, to all the everybody's scared of getting sued or what have you. While we're all getting sicker in the end.
Absolutely.
Where do you go from there? I mean, how do we reset? And I think that's why we're all here, to be honest with you. And that's why hundreds of millions of people are in their situation. We need a big reset.
Absolutely. You know, I think they're from a systems level making the monetary component, because that does, at the end of the day, money drives everything. We know that it's an unfortunate and a harsh reality, but uh, if you incentivize doctors and nurses and any healthcare provider to do a certain thing in order to make a paycheck, they're naturally going to do that. And what we've incentivized is, like you said, paperwork, checking boxes on the electronic medical record, dispensing medications, looking at the screen while the patient is talking to you, which is a basic human interaction thing, not something that needs to be trained, but we're all guilty of it to some degree. I find myself looking at the screen when patients are talking to me, more often than I'd like to admit, but I like to think that when appropriate, I'm looking the patient in the eyes. I'm looking at them like they're a human, listening to them, tell their story and responding to it appropriately. Because we all go to doctors not just for the medical care, but for someone to hear us. I do that when I'm on the patient side. Everything flips all of a sudden, and I forget that, oh, this person has a schedule and I'm a 15-minute slot. That goes out the window because me, right? Uh, I think incentivizing time with the patient, whether or not it is directly profitable to the practice or to the hospital, would be a great first change. Unfortunately, we move away from it further and further as each piece of legislation comes along.
Well, and again, another topic I think we can get into is why people are going to holistics, going
Yeah.
other routes, is because they're not getting that empathy. They're not getting that what they deserve actually in medicine. Whether you call it Western or modern or what have you, they're not getting that conversation that you're talking about. And that's why, well, to me, holistics kind of got the bad end of the deal with modern medicine. And we forgot about a lot of the natural aspects of it, which again is why we're in our situation. So trying to, for me, combine the two, because we don't want to just throw modern medicine out the window because they've done a lot of amazing things. The technology is just, oh, I mean, it's mind blowing, to be honest with you. And coming from the search tech side, I mean, it's just amazing. But again, if we can't come together, we're we're not going to get anywhere in my mind, and you're going to have people just totally go one way or the other.
I agree wholeheartedly, and this may be a topic for another time. But you had mentioned uh, that I have a company, Lala Health, and the reason that I started this company is beyond research interests. I saw that the holistic space is quickly turning into its own kind of uh, nightmare entity. What I mean by that is there's so much snake oil out there. There's so much misinformation or kind of purposeful. Here's data, but you look for the data on Google and it doesn't exist at all. Uh, Trying to kind of recreate the Western medicine aspect, kind of from the credibility standpoint, uh, and losing what actually makes holistic health appealing, which is they're not bound by the same time constraints, and they can be a true healer in the original sense of the word, and they can listen to you and take care of the psyche and the mind. And that was my and continues to be my goal and my aim. There's a huge paper in Circulation, one of the kind of most prominent cardiology journals a few years ago that kind of proved this and proved my subjective experience, at least, that 57% of people who go to cardiology clinics and have high cholesterol still take a supplement aimed at improving their cholesterol. But when you do a deep dive, those supplements have no data behind them, or they have zero data, or it's data in mice that we don't care about. We're not mice, we're humans. Uh, so basically, what I'm saying is I agree that holistic medicine at one point was a route towards closer to what we should be doing and how we should be doing things, but it's becoming a dirty space in and of itself. It's almost like a catch 22. You have nowhere to turn to.
Well, yeah, and that's with Christy in the end. Chemo, radiation wasn't working. It didn't work. So where do you go? And is it going to hurt to try anything? You know what I mean? And that's exactly where everybody's going.
But where did you guys go out of curiosity, or did you explore anything?
Yeah, me on the. Oh, I'm trying to remember. It's the dewormer. Um,
Yeah, okay. Ivermectin?
yep, ivermectin, and then was it Fenben or?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but again, it was way too late. I mean, 5 years at almost stage 4. It just, and I actually saw images that I had never seen recently when I kind of went through her phone. There was no way, if she would have started 5 years ago, maybe if it's real. But like you said, how do we know for sure? But that brings up another point. The government's not in a hurry. Researchers aren't in a hurry to test some of this stuff either.
Absolutely fair. I'll make kind of two comments there. To your point about whether it works or not, aspirin, which we all take for granted as something that works, came from tree bark. People were chewing on that tree bark for hundreds of thousands of years before we isolated the compound and started reproducing it in labs. So there's definitely something to your point about, should we be testing more things? Should we be funding more things? At the same time, NIH funding is being cut, and so things that previously may have had priority are now degraded. But I asked you about where you turned because this was actually a point of contention with uh, these three kids' father. Uh, it was clearly end stage. Everybody was saying it was end stage, including myself and becoming the bad guy, and my wife. Both of us are in the medical field, and we became villains because of it. But uh, what ended up happening was exactly this: ivermectin and mebendazole became options, and I just found it so horrifying to see the way it played out because it was a nurse call, $200 initial call to talk about the product. The physician who was purportedly behind this, when you do a brief Google search, had lost his medical license for behavior not befitting anyone in his kind of role, sexual harassment, kind of that kind of stuff, fraudulent claims, selling this stuff at massive upcharges. And the nurse call was basically, do you want the product or not? $200 for her to say, I can offer this to you. And everybody in the family fell for it. And it clearly was a scam. Whether or not it works, the way it was being done was a scam. I hope that was not your guys' experience, but it definitely derailed kind of his last days.
Yeah, no, Christy was down to, there was one chemo, but it wasn't going to extend her life sort of situation. Um, we had gotten into, we had nothing else to do. So I became a holistic nutrition coach. My wife got her holistic practitioner, and it wasn't so much it was trying to decide what's true and what's not true, to be honest. It's like you said, it's a Google search, and if it's not there, it's not there. And that was what was really frustrating throughout our battle, was not knowing the truth. And we can go back to also with the actual treatments, the side effects is what really got us, both of us, and nobody talks about it. She ended up with neuropathy, blood clots, which eventually were going into her lungs, which could have been what caused, her passing. We don't know for sure because, it didn't matter at that point. But That's another reason I'm doing this. We have to get out in front of this stuff, you know? Okay, great, you're doing chemo, but what are you gonna go through afterwards? Or what are you gonna go through during? And what can we do to help? And I'm gonna bring up another one, prevention. How can we prevent my case? A year ago, I was being told I'm gonna die of obesity-related disease. I was 60 pounds overweight, not because I didn't work out or eat good, because of the side effects of everything I was on. And they had no answers, 0. So again, how do we get that all out there to really pay attention to those side effects, really pay attention to what you're taking from both sides?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of one arm of this is there's just a terrible there's terrible public health literacy. I mean, most people don't take an anatomy class, even in high school. They don't. It was an elective where I went to high school. I took it because I knew I had an interest in that aspect, but a lot of people didn't, and especially with no matter what you think about COVID, there's a lot we don't know about COVID, and there was a lot of very fair skepticism that came from that entire saga. Uh, and as a field, medicine didn't really do anything to, quell those fears. If anything, they've gotten worse. Uh, but people knowing more from an early age about what the body needs, what a healthy lifestyle looks like beyond, your local gym coach being also a stand-in for, physical health, and how you're supposed to treat your body. Nothing against them; they're doing the best they
Here's the
can.
here's the best part about that. My dad was a gym coach, and he knows 0. Trust me, and he's gonna love this little conversation. So I love that you just went there.
Those
And he
kids
does
were
not listen to me, by the way.
Oh my god, I'm so sorry. It's unfortunately too common, but we're slotting people in the wrong roles, right? It starts with education, and uh, part of the issue now is people are developing that sense that I'm going to do my own research, but they don't know where to start. No one told them how do you parse through scientific data. And now we have things like Google AI Overview. If you like, the vast majority of users who have a browser, most people use Chrome, and those AI overviews are right at the top, and they are often incorrect. And so if you start looking for information, you're immediately hit with AI slop that may or may not be true with no citations, no nothing. So it's hard to educate yourself later in life, and we don't get it at the beginning. Again, it's a foundational systems-wide issue.
Without a
But I think
doubt.
that's where to start.
Without a doubt. And I mean, that brings up another point too to me. I'm not very technical. I've been in the industry. I probably know a little bit more than the average person. But when I sit there and I try and watch a video or something and they go deep into the science part of it, okay, I get some of the mechanisms and all that. But no, it's just you've lost me. And we've lost a lot of people by not connecting on, I hate to say their level, but I think you know what I mean. Just from a common sense, just like we're talking right now, it doesn't happen. We don't do it. And that's what we need to do.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's a stereotype now. You go to a doctor's office. There's a kind of a faceless person in a white coat who's talking at you in jargon. This is not a cure, but one thing that I've found that's very helpful for something that is a little bit more complex, like cardiology and interventions. I open up arteries during heart attacks and do high risk cases from that perspective, and also replace valves. I know people don't know about that. So the best thing that I've found is I carry a little whiteboard with me, and I take a marker out and I draw what the problem is. And I don't know if people are just giving me lip service or whether it's true, but that tends to resonate with patients, and they seem to be able to tell me in their own words better than if I just spoke at them what the issue is and what I'm hoping to solve for them by doing X, Y, or Z procedure. I think there are different ways to educate, and we just don't, from a medical education standpoint, we don't teach future providers how to educate people who don't know. Patients, we just don't.
I agree,
We also
and
don't have a required nutrition class, just FYI, in case you didn't know.
right. Man, we could get into the food pyramid thing too now, but
Right, oh, yeah, that's a whole separate 45 minutes.
that's the thing. But that's the again why we're doing this. There is so much to talk about. We went from tragedy to kind of where we're at, kind of missing. There's so much we're missing. So let's with one thing, maybe we can get out of this from the tragedy part of it. Uh, the mental side, I think. Oh man, I just, how do we do it? I mean, people don't understand. Like I said, you get letters, you get, all this stuff in the mail, sorries and all that, but real support doesn't seem to be there. And I'm not saying that people don't love you or don't care. They just don't understand. And how do we change that? How do we help those that are going through it make others understand we need help?
Again, you're asking all the hard questions, and I applaud you for it. Hopefully, we can get some kernels out there. This definitely took place with those three kids, and I felt terribly for them because it was friendly fire, right? It's family members who are well-meaning, but asking about, do you still have a job? Well, one or both parents are, going through cancer. The mother probably had, based on how advanced she was, she probably had malignancy at the same time as her husband. Uh, that's an empathy level thing on a human level, but in terms of uh, you know mental health support, I'll just give you kind of the lay of the land. In Alabama, there's one big inpatient psychiatric unit. Not that's not what we're talking about to give you a sense of how few and far between mental health services are. Uh, I'll give you an example from my own life. Since I was a kid, or somewhere along the road in middle school or high school, I got diagnosed with severe ADHD as a Nashville criteria. 17 is the highest you can score, and I scored a 17.
Nice.
Get a psychiatrist just to get ADHD medication so I can do my job like a functioning person is a nightmare. Most of my adult life has, I've navigated it by essentially having friends who will see me as a favor. And that's not a benefit that the vast majority of people have. So getting things like counseling for the three children after the fact, grief counseling as a group, there was a 6-month waiting list for an online remote grief counseling. It's like, no, this is happening right now. Like, I need help today, yesterday. Uh, Again, it's systems issue, but I think as a community, there are things that we can do, right? There are groups that meet, like, AA comes to mind. That's something that people come together for out of the goodness of their heart for the most part. There's no real profit being exchanged there. Uh, Being more community oriented, being less closed off to the fact that we have neighbors who, not to get too into the weeds politically, but who look different than us, speak differently than us, but have a shared experience, being more open to that, what makes us human rather than what is different about the other person. That's a foundational change that needs to happen in the culture. And unfortunately, we're not the only country, but we're certainly, should be better as the leader, globally. But we've gotten so divided that it's sometimes hard to see through the mist and be like, oh, we have something in common. We both suffered together, or we had a family member who suffered together. We can talk about this, and this doesn't have to be a paid transaction. I think that's the way to bridge the gap because aside from overhauling the system, you're not going to get a therapist or a psychiatrist who's going to see you in a timely manner when you're suffering through grief and having thoughts of hurting yourself, right now.
No, and I agree 100%. And that's why I'm doing this. I want to build the biggest community in the world. Not because there's that many people sick, but guess what? You know somebody. We need just, and here's the thing, we don't know the truth on everything. That's part of life. So we need to stop thinking we do, and just have those conversations. You taught me a lot today by simply, we're just having those conversations and having those questions basically. And that's a huge part of why I'm doing this. You know, just so you know, you're not out there suffering alone. We all have been through it, or majority of us have actually been through it in some way. You know, whether you know somebody, how are you treating them? Are you empathetic towards what they're going through, or do you just not? You don't know. They're out there, they're over there, so we're not going to talk about it. You know, so there's such a huge potential, I want to say, with us within creating a community to just simply talk about it. And that's what I really want to do. I see we're pretty much up on time. We're just at the beginning, though. You know, it has been such a pleasure. Um, I hope, I hope we can continue to do this. Um, there's so many different avenues I want to go. So, uh,
Unsaid things already in my mind just on this topic.
right.
I think what you're doing is very admirable and it's necessary. Story.
Well, I really appreciate it. Dr. Ahmed, I mean, honestly, a pleasure. We're going to put the links on the website for sure. Lila Health. Lila Health. We want to definitely go there. I've already checked it out. Looks great. Like I said, I want to try it. I probably need to try it. You know, I'm doing what I can with this gut stuff. So thank you again. And as we go out, folks, thank you for listening. And as Christy would have said, find the attitude, keep the attitude, go out living.